Hi everybody, I'm Mrs. Waba. Welcome to Honors Chemistry. Hope you're enjoying your summer break so far. We're going to talk about the summer assignment and the notes for chapters 1 and 3 today. So first, you will be getting a packet for each chapter. So you already received the packets for chapters 1 and 3. Just so you know, there's a general format for each of the packets. So usually the packet will start with a little poem. You don't need to read that. It's optional, of course. These were written by Ben Nichols, who was a former student of mine for his final project. Then you'll see the learning targets for the chapter. So I would encourage you to read over those, make sure that you know what we're doing each day. And then following that, you'll find guided notes. Those we usually do in class together. Then you'll find all the worksheets that are going to be assigned for homework for that specific chapter. Usually following that are sample questions for the chapter. This is kind of like your review, although I don't like to call it review because you want to do those at the end after you've studied, not to start reviewing for the chapter. This is not included in chapter 1 just because it's a very short chapter, but it will be included in future packets. Anyways, after the sample problems, you will find the lab handouts that we will be using for any of the labs that we will do in that chapter. So for chapter 1, you'll find your poem, then the learning targets, the guided notes. We're going to do the guided notes together through this video. You're going to take down some notes. These are your own notes, so you decide what you want to write down, what you don't want to. And then you have 3 worksheets for chapter 1. Those are going to be part of your summer assignment, so make sure that you do those before the first day of school in August. And then you'll find some handouts for labs. Obviously, you can't do those labs at home, so we're going to do those together. There's also, for chapter 1, a video that we're going to watch about safety and so on, so don't worry about those. So we'll start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 is an introduction to science. What is science? What is chemistry? Why are we studying it? We're also going to look at different equipment and glassware that we're going to be using throughout the year. We're going to talk about safety in the lab. That's basically all of chapter 1. So we'll go ahead and start the notes. So we'll start the notes with what is science? You've been taking a science class since, elementary school. What exactly is science? So science is the study of the physical and the natural world around us, and we study the world around us using observations. We do experiments, and in the experiments we basically collect observations. So let's write that down. So it is the study of the physical and natural world through observations and experimentation. So in science in general, we do observations, and so it's very important to understand what kinds of observations can we make and so on. But this is for science in general. How about chemistry? What exactly is chemistry, and how is it different from, any other science? So chemistry deals with matter. Matter is anything that has mass or volume. So for example, your hand has mass and volume, that's matter. The air that you breathe has mass and volume, so that's matter. The table has mass and volume, so it's matter. So it's almost everything around us is matter. There are a few exceptions though, like for example, fire, heat, light, sound. electricity, those don't really have mass or volume, so those would not be considered matter. But almost everything that you can see around you is matter. So chemistry is the study of matter and the changes that matter undergoes. So what are these things made up of? What is their composition? What is their structure? What are their properties? And then we also study chemical reactions, which are the changes that one substance can undergo to turn into another substance. So let's go ahead and write that down. So it is the study of matter. So anything that has mass or volume, we study its composition, structure, properties, and so on, and the changes that matter undergoes. So these would be actually the chemical reactions. For example, I have a piece of paper. The paper has mass and volume, so that's matter. So I can study its properties. I can study what it's made of. And then, let's say I burn it, it turns into something else. So I study that chemical reaction, that change. There are a variety of different branches in chemistry. So here are some examples of different branches of chemistry. There's a lot of different branches. There's 20 some. We're only looking at, the basic ones or some of the major ones. So we'll start with the first one, which is organic chemistry. Organic chemistry is the most popular type of chemistry. Most chemists are organic chemists. And organic chemistry is the study of most carbon-containing substances. So any molecules, any substances that have carbon in them. You'd be surprised that most molecules, most compounds that we know of today, the millions and millions, most of those are organic molecules. They have carbon in them. Anything that's living has carbon in it, so your body is mostly organic molecules. Plants are organic molecules. Any animals are made up of organic molecules. Anything that you eat, most of your clothing, most of our fuels, those are all organic molecules. And so that's why most chemists are organic chemists. So an example of something that an organic chemist would study, for example, would be how gasoline is produced from oil, for example. And I apologize, my handwriting is not very clear. I have a new stylus and I'm not really used to it yet. All right, another branch of chemistry is inorganic chemistry. So that would be chemists that deal with non-organic substances. So things that do not have carbon molecules in them. And there's lots of molecules that don't have carbon in them. For example, salt, table salt, sodium chloride, NaCl. So, for example, how salt reacts with acids, for example. That would be something that an inorganic chemist would study. Next is analytical chemistry. So analytical chemistry is the study of identification of the components and composition of materials. If you think about it, analytical comes from analysis. So analytical chemists analyze what substances are made up of. So they analyze what substances are made up of and also how much of that substance is there. So they usually do a lot of math. So for example, an analytical chemist might study how much chlorine is in tap water, for example. so they can, you know, figure out if that's a good amount or, you know, too much or too little. You need chlorine in the water to kill, you know, any of the microbes or bacteria that can exist in the water. But too much chlorine is not very good for us. Another branch of chemistry is physical chemistry. So physical chemistry is basically a hybrid between physics and chemistry. It's the study of the properties, changes, and relationships between energy and matter at the atomic scale. Physical chemistry has to do a lot with what happens during a chemical reaction in terms of energy and in terms of speed. So they measure reaction rates, for example. And there is also a lot of math involved in physical chemistry. So, for example, a physical chemist might study how the size of a water molecule determines the rate at which it dissolves salt, for example. So how the size of a water molecule determines the rate at which it dissolves salt. Another branch of chemistry is biochemistry. Biochemists actually study a lot of organic chemistry. So biochemistry is a hybrid between biology and chemistry. It's the study of substances and processes occurring in living things. So matter that is inside of a living thing, and then how that matter changes or undergoes change. So most living things are made up of organic molecules, and so biochemists study the organic molecules that are in living things. So for example, they would study the organic chemistry that's in your body, but they would not study the organic chemistry that's in plastic, for example. Plastics are organics, but we don't care about them for biochem. So the chemistry of living things, basically. So a biochemist, an example of something that he would study would be how sugar in the bloodstream affects insulin production, for example. Insulin production. Last step we're going to be talking about is theoretical chemistry. So in theoretical chemistry, there's a lot of math involved. It's the use of math and computers to understand chemical behaviors and design new compounds. So basically, a theoretical chemist doesn't really go into a wet lab. They don't use flasks and Bunsen burners and stuff like that. What they do is they sit in front of a computer, and usually these are, you know, very sophisticated computers or supercomputers that calculate different things about molecules. They can calculate the angles within a molecule. They can calculate some behavior, you know, like how one molecule reacts with another molecule, things like that. So, for example, a theoretical chemist might study the modeling the folding of a protein. So remember, a protein is made up of amino acids, so it's a pretty large molecule. And so a theoretical chemist might sit on his computer and try to model what the protein looks like and how it folds, for example. And so there are mathematical calculations using computers. So obviously all of these divisions overlap, and chemistry overlaps with a lot of other sciences as well, and a lot of other subjects as well. Chemists do research, whether in a wet lab or in front of a computer. And so there's 3 types of research, or really 2 types of research. There's basic research that's done in order to increase knowledge. So, you look at just different reactions, for example, involving water, to get to know more about water, so just for the sake of knowledge. Then we also have applied research. That's done to solve a specific problem. For example, if we are trying to, help with a different, with some sickness, for example, and we want to develop a drug for it, we want to test whether this drug works and what side effects it would have. So it's applied research is more practical, I guess, than basic research. But you can't do applied research unless you have some basic knowledge about, your substances. Then we have technological development. That is done to improve the quality of life. It's not research itself, but rather it's the outcome of research. So we find something out and then we use it to improve our life. This often lags behind the basic research that's done on the same substance. So obviously we need to know some information about that substance before we can use it to apply it to our daily life, to improve our life. And so an example of that, the creation of renewable fuel source for heating our houses to make them a little bit better. So technology is the application of the knowledge to improve life or for practical purposes. It's not exactly research. It's an outcome of research. Chemists often build models because chemistry is so abstract. Molecules are submicroscopic. That means the highest capacity microscope cannot view molecules. We still cannot see molecules. They are so small. And so a lot of times, in order to understand what's happening with these molecules, chemists need to make models that are on a much larger scale in order to create a visual for themselves. So models usually help us visualize atoms and molecules. Usually those models are much larger than the real thing so that we can be able to see it, because actual atoms and molecules are so small. And models don't have to be physical. Sometimes they're mathematical, so like in a form of an equation. Other times they're, even imaginary. So we can't really see them. Before we move on to the types of observations, I would encourage you on Google Classroom to look at the PowerPoint that's labeled What is Chemistry? I want to make sure that you understand why we are studying chemistry and the importance of chemistry. So, the most basic reason why you would take chemistry, obviously, other than, to help you in college, is to be informed. There are chemicals all around you. Everything is basically a chemical. You are made up of chemicals. Water you drink is a chemical. Air you breathe is a chemical. So anything that has mass or matter is considered, mass or and volume is considered matter. So everything around you is matter. Your clothing, the desk you sit on, or the chair you sit on, pretty much everything that you eat, your shampoo, really everything. And so it's important to know, how things interact together and what they're made of, just for you to be informed, what kind of cleaner should you use? What kind of cleaners should you not mix together? For the environment, you want to use chemicals that are safe for the environment. Cooking, if you like cooking, that's basically all chemical reactions. If you bake and the dough rises, that's a chemical reaction. If you live at high altitudes, for example, if you live in Denver, your cooking instructions are different. You gotta cook things for, longer or shorter depending on your altitude. That's because of chemistry. If you drive on the roads every winter when it snows, you get potholes. That's because of chemistry. So understanding why and treating it, that's all chemistry. Right now, there's, usually if you watch TV, there's problems with finding enough fuel and energy. So they're trying to go to cleaner and renewable sources of energy. So, they think ethanol, they think hydrogen. You need to know what these things mean and how they're used and their safety and their effects on the environment. You're going to soon be voting. You want to make sure that, whoever you're voting for is making good decisions. And so a lot of that has to do with science and specifically chemistry. And, if you go into a variety of different fields, work-wise, you will need a lot of chemistry. So obviously if you're a scientist, you'll need chemistry, but also let's say you're a journalist, for example, and you need to write an article. You need to be aware of, environmental issues, safety issues, stuff like that. If you decide to go into healthcare, for example, if you want to be a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist, you need to know the chemical reactions that are in your body. You need to know how different drugs interact with your body, stuff like that. If you're a construction worker or if you're an engineer, you want to make sure you pick materials that are sturdier, that are more corrosion resistant, that are better for the environment. That's all chemistry. If you're an investment manager, you want to know what technologies and what materials you want to invest in. So chemistry is all around us, and it's very important to study it. So I would recommend that you look over that short PowerPoint that's labeled what is chemistry in your Google Classroom. All right, so we said that science, and specifically chemistry, to study everything around you, you need to do some observations. So observations are very important. We have two types of observations, qualitative or quantitative observations. So we'll start with qualitative observations. So these are descriptive versus quantitative observations. These have to do with numbers, so they're numerical. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in class in August, but for example, let's say I have a pen. So I can say the pen is blue. That would be a descriptive observation, so it would be a qualitative observation. I could say the pen is 10 inches long. That would be a numerical observation or a quantitative observation. So quantitative has to do with quantity or number, and so it has to have a number in your statement, whereas qualitative is descriptive, so odor, color, feel, things like that, those would be qualitative observations. We also have inference versus observation. That's very important. In science, we only make observations. We do not do inferences. So an inference is basically a guess. Usually it's an educated guess. An observation is info obtained by your five senses. So for example, you could say, let's say you have a cup of water in front of you, saying that it's a liquid, that's something that you see. Saying that it's room temperature, maybe that's something that you feel. Odorless, that's something that you smell. But saying that that liquid is water without you knowing, if it's not labeled, then that would be an inference. So in chemistry, we like to make observations. We just like to record down the information that we see from our senses. We do not like to make inferences. Another thing we're going to talk about, since, we need to collect data, make observations, do experimentation, are the types of variables. I know you've covered this many, many times before, so we're going to very briefly talk about it. So in the scientific method, we usually use many variables. There are two types of variables. We have the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the independent variable, that's usually the variable that is being manipulated or changed in the procedure. So that's the cause. So that's what you change. The dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. So it is the variable that is being affected by you changing the independent variable. For example, let's say I want to study the effects of temperature on solubility. So, like, for example, if you were to make tea and you want to dissolve some sugar in your water, if you put sugar in cold water, usually you don't dissolve as much as if you put sugar in hot water. And so if you want to study the effects of temperature on solubility, you get water at different temperatures, and you change your temperature of the water, and you add sugar until it dissolves. And you check, is it dissolving more, is it dissolving less? And so in this case, the independent variable, what you are changing, the cause is the temperature. The dependent variable is what is being affected by you changing the temperature, which would be the solubility. So the solubility of the sugar would be the dependent variable. The temperature would be the independent variable. You also usually need a control trial. That's usually used as a baseline or a comparison. So that's the norm, and then when you change something, you study the effects of that change. For example, you probably heard a lot about the placebo effect in your biology class. So let's say they have a new medicine or a new drug that they want to test. So what they do is they have groups of people come in, and one of those groups would be the control group. So what they do is they give them a placebo. They give them a sugar pill that doesn't have any of the medicine. The other group, they give them the real medicine, and they see the effects of both, so that they know that if there were positive effects, those are because of the medicine, not because the people feel like they're getting medicine, for example. There's a quick note here. It says, when describing variables, it's important to be specific. For example, if the amount of water is changed, the dependent variable is the mass of the water or volume of water. If the color of the water is changed, the independent variable would be color of the water. So you can't just say the water changed. You got to say the mass of the water changed or the color of the water changed. What changed? So you got to be very specific. Okay, we have an example here. It says that Enrique and Lacey are testing soil for contamination outside a nuclear power plant. They test the concentration of the contaminants at different distances from the plant. So we want to know what is the dependent variable and what's the independent variable. So let's think about this. So they're looking at different distances from the power plant, and they're seeing how does that affect the concentration of the contamination or the contaminants. So the independent variable is the distance from the plant. The dependent variable would be the concentration of the contaminants. I'm sorry, this is a symbol for concentration. So that says concentration there. Third question says, what are some factors that they will keep constant? So we don't want to change those. So things that would remain constant, for example, temperature, maybe make sure it's the same power plant, maybe same weather, things like that you don't want to be something that affects it other than the distance. For example, we want to check all the days when it's not raining or all the days when it is raining, something like that. Okay, the last 2 pages of notes in chapter 1, I'm going to let you read on your own. You've all graphed before and you've analyzed data before, so these are just some tips and some information for what you need to do. I would highly encourage you that you read through these. Let me know if you have any questions, because you will be graphing some stuff for your worksheets. So, just some information about, variables, how you graph things. You need to make sure that you title your graph. Usually it's Y versus X. How to pick your scale. Different types of graphs, different types of relationships, a direct relationship versus an inverse relationship, what they would look like on a graph. Types of graphs, so line graphs versus bar graphs versus a histogram. In science, we always want to do a scatter plot. So you put the points on there and then you never connect the points. You usually draw the line of best fit. You never connect points in science. All right, so I'm going to let you read those 2 pages. Then make sure that you do worksheets 1 through 3 in chapter 1. And then the next video will be the notes for chapter 3.